Well, interesting to hear from the Home Secretary, James Cleverly, there saying it was a real mistake. Was it? Well, joining me now is the Deputy Editor of Conservative Home, Henry Hill. Henry, thanks for joining me. What do you make of what we've heard James Cleverly saying there and also what Lee Anderson has done?
Well, the funny thing is that last year, Lee Anderson said that he'd been offered a large sum of money to join Reform and turned them down. So one wonders whether or not that deal was still on the table and whether his subsequent losing of the Tory whip affected the spot price. Obviously, every time a politician defects, they are always going to have things that they said when they were in their former party, which are embarrassing. The floor crossings are relatively uncommon these days, but of course, when he was a vice chair or deputy chair of the Conservative Party, Lee Anderson was urging voters not to back Reform UK. And it will be interesting to see him justify his decision to switch. But as James, I think, implied, he's personally popular with the Conservative inside the Conservative Party amongst his former colleagues. Unfortunately, when he made those supremely ill-judged remarks about Sadiq Khan and then refused to apologise, he really left the Conservative Party no option
But
but to withdraw the whip.
interesting from your own readers, Henry, on Conservative Home, there was a fascinating survey. Almost two-thirds of party members, this was on the 3rd of March, opposing Sunak's suspension of Anderson. So there will be many who will be sad to see him go, Henry.
Absolutely. As I said, amongst the parliamentary colleagues who knew him personally, he was well liked. And there are a lot of Conservative activists up and down the country who, even if they didn't agree with Lee Anderson on all of his positions, they did like the fact that somebody was up there in the parliamentary party, often in the senior ranks of the party side of the parliamentary party, speaking out, and who wasn't afraid to speak out, and clearly wasn't afraid to speak his mind. So, as you say, two-thirds roughly of our panel that we run on Conservative Home opposed the suspension. But personally, I think in the circumstances, the party had very little choice.
In terms of the real mistake that James Cleverly talks about, it's interesting because Lee Anderson has ruled out a by-election. Anthony Mangle MP, Conservative MP, says, given that Lee Anderson backed and signed my recall motion stating that if MPs crossed the floor to another political party, I hope he is calling a by-election. Lee Anderson says he's not going to do that because there might be an election in May. But if we look at Ashfield, which Lee Anderson took from Labour with a 7.9% swing, that was in 2019, majority of 5,733. It's a really interesting constituency, isn't it? Because the Ashfield Independents, who hold 30 of the 35 seats on the council, Ashfield Council, I mean, it's just slightly different, isn't it? Do you think he can win it for Reform? Do you think Labour will win? What do you think happens whenever the general election is? Could Reform UK have an MP, but only for a short period of time because it's so difficult to get an MP through in other constituencies?
It is very difficult. Now that they have a sitting MP to defend, you can imagine that Reform UK will concentrate resources on that seat in a way that they wouldn't have otherwise, and that might make the difference. But yes, the Ashfield Independents came second last time. Their candidate is a former Liberal Democrat candidate who actually almost won the seat in 2010 off Labour. So you imagine now Labour are well up, so it may be that the baseline assumption has to be that Ashfield returns to the Labour Party. But you can imagine if Lee Anderson puts up a strong fight and the Ashfield Independents manage anything resembling their performance last time, it could very well be a kind of three-way bun fight between the two. And in first past the post, that sort of seat can produce very strange results because you only need to edge it by a very small margin to return the MP.
Henry, you're an expert of the Conservative Party, but what about Reform UK itself? I was saying to Madeline Grant a few minutes ago, there's probably no real sense. I mean, Lee Anderson is loved and is lauded because he tells it like it is, as many people see it. He certainly puts his points across and he's a hostage to no one. And even in that press conference, which I'm sure you watched earlier, there was a little bit of tension between the sort of arch smoothie Richard Tice trying to be sort of nice and answer all the journalists' questions, whereas I thought Lee Anderson was pretty snippy, actually, to Beth Rigby of Sky when she asked him quite a reasonable question about the Conservatives who'd been sent out to support him. But the wider point I suppose I'm making is that Lee Anderson is nobody's patsy. He's going to do what he wants. And I wonder just how much control Richard Tice or Nigel Farage or whoever in the Reform UK firmament is actually going to have over their new MP.
Well, I don't imagine it's very much because, as you say, previously Rishi Sunak tried to bring Lee Anderson inside the tent by making him a party deputy chairman. That didn't work. And he has a lot more leverage in his new party. He's Reform's only MP. That means that he is the one who decides whether they get access to short money. That's the money made available by Parliament to support parties that are represented in it. He's going to be their parliamentary spokesperson on everything. He's got a knack for winning headlines and attracting attention. So it really is going to be a multipolar party for the foreseeable future. And it'll be interesting to see how Richard Tice copes with that, because historically, one of the things that continually bedeviled UKIP was that Nigel Farage, for all his talents, was deeply unwilling to let other centres of power emerge and let other people gain positions of prominence in UKIP or through UKIP.
Yeah, I think we can very safely say that Richard Tice is certainly overshadowed by Nigel Farage. Now he's been overshadowed by Lee Anderson. But just turning back to the Conservative Party, Henry, there has been some plotting, we know, from the Conservative Democratic Organisation. It's all centres around a woman called Judy McAlpine. Just tell us a little bit about her and what we've certainly been told that she's up to, is attempting to unseat Rishi Sunak, it would appear.
So Lady McAlpine is the widow of the late Lord McAlpine, who was a Conservative politician, and she is the prime mover in this apparent plot to bring back Boris Johnson ahead of the next election. And it's always fun to write about these things as a journalist, but it just has to be said that this whole scheme is mad. Notwithstanding your opinion on Boris Johnson as a politician, set that to one side. The idea that Rishi Sunak is going to allow Boris Johnson to be selected as a Conservative MP before the election or at the election just seems ridiculous, because it's an obvious threat to his position. Boris, for better or worse, stood down. He didn't fight his Uxbridge constituency in that by-election. He might have won it because the Tories retained it, and instead he left Parliament, which means now whether or not he comes back is essentially up to Rishi Sunak. Rishi Sunak would have to let him onto the candidates list, let him onto the special bit of the candidates list that goes for winnable seats. Then he'd have to find a seat. It's just wildly implausible. And I think Rishi's actually pretty secure precisely because all of the plausible contenders who want to be leader of the Conservative Party, all of them are waiting until after the general election, because that's when they want to take over. They don't want to seize the crown now and just have their name attached to what is shaping up to be an historic defeat.
Henry, thank you very much indeed.